I'll start with the introductions. Marco Knittel, next to me, you're the founder and managing director from Czech.
Correct, thanks. Nice to be here.
Yep, thank you for coming. And then next to Marco is Tom, co-organizer of the International Cargo Bike Festival.
Yep.
We also know each other from bikes. You worked with my wife, Christy, here in the past, so we've known each other for a few years.
And we're neighbors.
And we're technically neighbors.
Yep.
Yeah, actually. And on the end is Josette Vallengoed Udo, the team lead for zero emissions mobility from the city of Amsterdam.
Thank you.
Cool. We've got quite an awesome panel lined up here. What we're going to be talking about, if anybody saw the title, I'm going to give you a little bit of a clarification. Its title is How Micromobility, or How the Micromobility Revolution is Reshaping the Netherlands. But we kind of all joked, I don't think we can speak for like all of the Netherlands, because each individual gemeente or municipality in the Netherlands kind of makes their own decisions. So I think for today's conversation, we're mostly going to talk about Amsterdam, or at least in and around it, and a lot of the policies that are changing here, maybe because or due to the trends that a lot of people are talking about here at the show. To get the conversation started, I think it was you, Josette, that said this is kind of singularly like the most important change when it comes to micromobility or smaller vehicles, was most recently in a lot of the streets here in the city, we've went from 50 kilometers an hour to 30 kilometers an hour.
Yeah. So in terms of policies in Amsterdam, we're moving to a situation where there will be more space for living, more space for breathing, more space for bikes, more space for pedestrians, and we need to take care of the safety, because we see the amount of incidents that are happening in Amsterdam, we see them increasing again. So indeed, recently we took the majority, over 80% of the streets, from 50 kilometers per hour to 30 kilometers per hour, which makes the mobility and moving around on the streets makes it more safe. It's still crowded, and it will become more crowded, but at least if you drop the velocity, the impact when there's a hit is much less severe.
Like exponentially less damaging, and the stopping time, like when you hit the brakes, you can stop much more quickly. Like
exactly.
The change is huge.
Yeah.
Cool. Another thing I think when it comes to Czech that's happening here in the city is they're actually decreasing parking spaces for cars, but that's not necessarily an issue for you guys to some degree, because you're not just doing e-mopeds, but also doing vehicles.
Yeah, correct. We started experimenting with cars roughly a year ago. We've been scaling that up, and because we truly believe that, you know, a moped, in our case, electric moped or a scooter in Dutch, yeah, you probably know both terms, but I think it's a great product for intercity traffic or movements. But once you want to go outside the city, then obviously a car makes much more sense. And from Czech, we really try to be this sort of one-stop shop, which maybe other like mass parties are trying to do with aggregating companies and products. We think that we can do that from Czech.
Cool. Like I said, I have already like a bias towards bikes many years before I moved here, but when I think of like car replacement, maybe not from like city to city, though I've ridden all over the Netherlands on bikes, even to like Groningen and back. But a good car replacement, I would say, would be a cargo bike. But for cargo bikes, we experienced it on the ride, and this morning actually, like the bike lanes are quite crowded. I think anyone here in the crowd has seen or experienced that. So how's it going with cargo bikes in the city? I mean, more and more people. We see lots of urban arrows. Like
yeah. Well, yeah, there are a lot of cargo bikes in the Netherlands. There have been for a number of years, and it's different to, I guess, from where I came from, where, you know, if I tell people what I do, some people even say, what is a cargo bike? I still have to remind myself, you know, sometimes you have to explain what this thing is. But they've been popular for families for many years, and then in the last 10 years, you know, you've had the rise of the e-bike as well. Urban Arrow is getting a lot more easy to get around.
Yeah.
With that makes it a lot easier. That's the family side, but there's also a whole business side of it. Organizations using cargo bikes.
Last mile logistics.
Yeah, last mile logistics. Not just that, but also service providers, plumbers, people going out and fixing things on cargo bikes as well. You can carry everything you need mostly on a cargo bike.
No doubt. Yeah. So one thing I was going to mention, like last year when I had the opportunity to do a panel, it was about shared mobility, and I think there's an aspect of that for our conversation, specifically what you do. A statistic that you mentioned when we were doing the prep for this conversation was that most people that own a car, their car is sitting in one spot for like 23 hours of the day.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the cars that you guys have are being used throughout the day?
Yeah, between 6, 8, 10 hours a day, roughly.
Yep.
But I mean, if you look back at it, it's quite. If you run let's say you run an airline company or any other company, and your assets are idling 23 hours out of 24. I mean, that's ridiculous. You wouldn't run a company. But that's how people run their own micro company called your private car.
Yeah.
And yes, there is a benefit to having it always available, of course.
Yeah.
But I think in 20 years, maybe 10 years from now even, you look back at your own car ownership as like this teacher smoking in front of a classroom 20 years ago. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. But the alternatives are only getting there slowly.
Yeah. So I think what you guys both share is like how cargo bikes or the shared mopeds or cars like fit into the city. And the thing that we talked about is like there's a lot of new development in Amsterdam. I think like the core inner ring of the canals is always going to kind of stay the same, but like outside on the edges of the city, certainly here in Nord, you see more buildings being built, more housing being built. And at least from where I'm from, if you're building a new apartment building, there has to be a lot of space for parking, which now may include space for cargo bikes, which is great. But it's actually less car parking, like the parking coefficient, as it's called.
Yeah, so the parking coefficient is going down. So we're providing less space for parking per apartment at the moment, which means that you see that the apartments, the organizations behind them, they're offering car sharing from the parking garage.
But that's like within the community of neighbors.
Within the
they're
community
sharing
of
a car.
neighbors. Yeah. And that makes it possible for people to move into an apartment in Amsterdam without the ownership of a private car. That makes it possible. And it's a trend, and I think it's easier when you come into the city as a new inhabitant than when you're already living there and you're used to your car, right? It's always difficult to change habits. But if you're coming new to a city or if you're a young person without a car, we'd like to make it as easy as possible to not make the choice to buy your first car when you're living in Amsterdam.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely.
So one of the things that you see with these new high-rise buildings that they have this coefficient going down. But once you start to implement, let's say, a dedicated fenced-off pool for cars for those users, that works well up to a certain utilization ratio, let's say, I don't know, 50%. After that, the small pool becomes unreliable. So the
car's gone.
The car's gone, and with 3 cars or 6 cars, that's really hard. So the challenge, I think, for these buildings with the low coefficient is how do you get to a very liquid market state where there are always cars available? And I think, well, maybe in the future, the only way to do is with dynamic pricing, for example. Sounds very harsh because you just ask people to own less cars.
Yeah.
But the demand curve of a car is not linear. So you cannot create more cars and then have cars dissolve certain hours of the day. I think that will be the main
That's
challenge.
the real future.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay. Maybe in 5 years.
Dissolving cars.
Yeah.
But one thing we talked about, and I think this was kind of like, I don't necessarily like a drama or a beef with like the municipality or something, but this is where it gets really interesting.
There's a lot of beef. No.
Let's go.
Kidding.
Drum roll. But I learned that there's, and maybe people in the audience know this as well, but there's zone-based, so that, or no, I got it wrong. There's zone floating, so that's you guys, like the mopeds or the car have to kind of like be in a zone.
The mopeds are free floating.
Free floating. But free floating is challenging, just like with the scooters, like which is like the e-kickstep, razor scooter kind of thing. Those are kind of all over. You guys have to pick them up, bring them back. There's a higher likelihood that they might get damaged, parking, those kinds of things. But in the middle is like the green wheel style where there's the pulse. There's actually 3 different ways that the vehicles could be in the city.
Correct.
Okay. But what was the challenging thing? Like you feel like the city supports those poles more that it's visible so that the people think, oh, I could rent that car. Because if the vehicle's like free floating, they may not think of it as easily.
I mean, we have a good relationship so far, so I think I feel, confident to be a bit
You can be yourself.
harsh. Exactly.
So
Okay, be
far.
myself. Okay, that's a bit late. No, I mean, in honesty, the municipality is basically, sponsoring other companies by putting up a sign that says "Take green wheels from a certain stand."
Yeah.
It's and that when what you want is that those cars are being used, right? So when those cars are being used, the parking spot is blocked for no car.
What if it said green wheels, or if the car's gone, check?
Yeah, but okay, that would be great. Then if you come
then
back
you
with
come
your
back.
green wheels, exactly, that's going to be
You have
yeah.
to dissolve the car. That's in your
And then
place.
we're back to
Tom
the
will
software.
part a cargo bike
Yeah,
next to
it's
it.
going to park it in the middle.
But in short, I
Space,
think
yeah.
that model will not hold for a reason that economically it doesn't make sense from an operator. It shouldn't make sense from a municipality, and also a customer is actually in the end benefits, and also the non-customers, by the way, the inhabitants of Amsterdam,
Yeah.
they would benefit from a more optimal use of public space, and the green wheels is not that. That's
So-
I would say old school.
I like it when you say like more optimal use of public space, like I mentioned a moment ago. Like
And charging infrastructure, but
And
you would know
charging
more.
infra-
so yeah, that's exactly where I'm going actually, especially when it comes to cargo bikes. No, thank you. That was a perfect layup. Because the other joke we had on the call is like actually having less cars here, ironically, has led to more problems. The bike lanes are super crowded.
Yeah.
I'm not going to knock on cargo bikes. I love cargo bikes, but if there's like families barreling down and big cargo bikes,
Still
there's
Yeah.
less space. I'm not necessarily like a fat bike hater. I like fat bikes, but they also take up space. Sometimes you also have the mopeds in the bike lane.
Never.
It gets a little, never, but it gets hectic. So now, like more efficient use of public space, like you said, there's experiments where, ironically, the bike traffic, or traffic that would otherwise be in the bike lane, is going back onto the street. You have like the Fietsstraat, you have some experiments where faster e-bikes are going on the street. What do you think about that, Tom?
Well, I think it's certainly a good solution for the cargo bike. Like, there's a lot of, the older cycle lanes in Amsterdam, a lot of them are quite narrow, and they're being renewed. You see them being renewed all the time, but it obviously takes time. So I think there's a good argument for now that the 30 kilometer per hour limit has come in, and that's been in for a few months now, and people are starting to get used to it. That does give more space and more opportunity for cargo bikes.
Because cargo bikes aren't the slow-moving thing in the bike lane anymore. They're
No.
just as fast as everybody else.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah, most of them are e-bikes now, and that gives them the opportunity to safely go into the bike lane. Certainly the commercial ones, which are also quite heavy as well, often. So that's a development which is happening because the city is so busy with bikes.
For sure.
So it's a kind of luxurious problem which we don't have in the UK yet.
Or in the United States,
in the US,
yeah.
it's,
But there is an irony, I think, for the people in the audience here that are from other countries outside of the Netherlands. They're like, man, if we could improve our infrastructure and get more bike lanes. But if you look further down the road, so to speak, you might get rid of the bike lane anyway and just put everybody on the street going slower.
Yeah, and remove the velocity. So indeed, in Amsterdam, we now have 2 pilots running in streets where we basically take the faster bikes, we take them on the street themselves. So we'll investigate afterwards what the experience is from a user perspective, right? How they experience being out there on the street. Do they still feel safe while they're on their cargo bike, but really close to the cars? And what happens to the slower bikers?
Yeah, it
How
should be
do
like
they
little
feel?
kids, yeah.
Together with the little kids, because and that's a surprise sometimes to people that are not from the Netherlands, but young children in the Netherlands are really out there on bikes. They learn from a young age to be out there on a bike, on the street, and we need to ensure that everybody feels safe. And with that restriction going from 50 to 30, we've had that for 6 months now. So now we're starting to basically also control, right? To also provide, basically fines if people are still driving at
Like enforcement,
at 50. We're starting to enforce.
Yeah.
So we need to see and we need to experience in this area and see if this helps.
yeah.
I think the next note I have is more about infrastructure. I think this is precisely like your area of expertise, like for city planning, which sometimes has to do with the car charging. There's increasingly more spots to like charge an electric vehicle. But when it comes to the cargo bikes, I've had the instance where like I've ridden my friend's cargo bike to Utrecht, and when I got there, I couldn't find a place to charge the bike. But there are some ideas from the city to make it easier to charge cargo bikes in this.
Yeah.
Because historically hasn't been the case. You'll see cords going down from people's windows. I've seen them going across the streets. Like,
Yeah, yeah. So what we see in Amsterdam is the majority of those bikes, they have the accu that's replaceable. So you can take it out, you can charge it in your own home. But we also know that everybody, and me myself, I have the same problem. You are not always fully charged, right? So then you leave and you're somewhere in the middle of the city and you're without use, and there's nowhere that there's just an ability to plug. But we see a lot of challenges there. So there's been some pilots there, and not all the plugs are the same. So we have a huge majority of infrastructure there that makes it difficult to say, okay, we're providing this charging infrastructure for all the bikes here in Amsterdam. That's one of the challenges. The other challenge that we're facing, and I'm happy, I was already looking around this morning. There's some nice examples here, some nice innovations, but there's problems with theft. So if you lock your bike, but if you can remove it easily, then you cannot leave it behind. So there are some challenges there. Yeah. I'm sure that the market and some of the companies out here will come up with the good innovations in order to solve that problem, so we can basically provide some more charging infrastructure also for scooters and for mopeds there. But the assumption at the moment is that the majority is charging at home.
but you do have some tests coming like near the water where like there's some boats.
Yeah. So Amsterdam is a city of water, so we also need to provide infrastructure to boats. And what we're looking into now is that we're going to see if we can combine on certain areas the ability to charge your scooter where there's also a charge point for the boats. So that's very interesting because you will be very close to the water, but people in Amsterdam are used to that. So it's a pilot. We need to see if it works out, but if you can use the charging infrastructure for two modalities, then it's better in terms of use.
Do you guys want to add anything to that?
Yeah, well, I think just in terms of the cycling industry, and not just cargo bikes, but e-bikes as well. I was talking to a few people yesterday about, how close are we to getting a standard kind of battery? Yeah. Because I think that's probably where that we need to go to make that work in
would
practice.
Definitely help.
But I don't think the industry is ready yet, and it might end up being, a few years down the line that we get something like the USB-C thing that the EU did, which everybody has to have a USB-C charger in your, or you're not on the market. I don't know where it's going to go, but we're not there quite yet.
Yeah, and I think that's also one of the main reasons to not put a full charging infrastructure in place. Because also from a circular point of view, that would be a waste, right? If we put that infrastructure in place and in a few years from now, we'll have a different standard in place. Yeah. So we need to start small, and we need to test things out and see where the market is going, and if it's needed. That's the main point.
So one thing I think all three of you guys are contributing to is something you mentioned to me before we got on stage, is that Amsterdam is going to be the only city that's going to have like a emission-free zone. Did I get this correct?
Not the only city. So I'm happy to announce this is a big thing for Amsterdam. That on the 14th of May, the Council of Amsterdam has decided that per the 1st of January 2025, we'll have a zero-emission air zone in the whole of Amsterdam for scooters and mopeds, which basically means that we're the first city in Europe. And not the only city, because other cities will of course follow, but we're the first city in which there will be a zone for emission-free traffic, which means that if you're buying a new scooter or a new moped, from the 1st of January, that one needs to be electric. Otherwise, you will receive a fine throughout the whole city of Amsterdam. If you already own a scooter or a moped that's not emission-free. Then we'll have a transition period up till 2028 or 2030, depending on how old your scooter is, in order to basically transition to an electric version. So that's not the only ones, because there's a lot of other countries already moving into that situation as well. But we agreed with the council that the time is right, and in Amsterdam, it's a great opportunity to stimulate the market to move into emission-free.
That's great. Certainly for Czech, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, start as emission free. Well done.
That's amazing. But I mean, on the work going to this point of already improving the infrastructure, where you guys are considering charging for cargo bikes, you guys have multiple options for free-floating moped shares in the city, and increasingly also for other EVs. I mean, I think we've kind of covered what we're doing in Amsterdam, at least to address or facilitate some of the changes that we see here in the micromobility scene. Is there anything else you guys wanted to mention or showcase?
Parking.
For cargo bikes.
For cargo bikes,
in general.
but also the general reduction in car parking spaces, right?
Definitely.
Was it 10,000 parking spaces that are being removed?
5,000.
5,000, okay.
Yeah, but that's probably there will be more. But indeed, there's I don't know how to say that in English. Amsterdam Makes Space. It's our program to basically make space in our city for cargo bikes, for bikes, for more green.
But ironically, more drama. The underwater parking by Central Station. I think anyone that's visiting from abroad, you should go by Central Station and go check out the underwater parking lot. But you can't park cargo bikes under there.
That's true.
Okay.
That's
okay.
True. That's a shame.
I'll talk about
putting
that.
in my complaint.
Thank you.
But it sometimes is an issue for cargo bikes of like where to park. It's hard to park a regular bike in the city sometimes.
Sure.
Yeah. And at both ends of your journey, you need to be able to securely park your cargo bike, because it's quite an investment when you own one yourself. There are also sharing services available, but they're not all everywhere in the city yet.
But is that something that kind of lags comparatively compared to like moped sharing or EV sharing? Is cargo bike sharing? I said in our prep call, there's a workshop here in Amsterdam called the Blauwe Daum, where you can go rent like a saw or a drill or one of these huge cargo bikes that's like 3 wheels, and you could put like tables and refrigerators on the front of it. But that's like the only spot in the city that I know you can do that.
Oh yeah, they're like the really old school ones.
Very old school.
Made of wood.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are cargo bikes on the street, which the gemeente, the municipality has they've put in these. You have to take the cargo bike back to the spot where it came from.
Yep.
And they're called bird hubs, I think, the neighborhood hubs.
Yeah.
But they're not. The network is not yet, so that there is one on every street, which obviously that takes a while to roll out.
How long has that existed?
I'm not sure actually. Do you know?
Yeah, so we'll not have one in every street, but I think we're looking at 750 spots in order to get bikes in throughout the city. So there will be an increase there.
Maybe that's if I can comment
Go
on
ahead.
that. I mean, so you see a trend in moped sharing as well in other cities about thinking about hubs. Mm-hmm. The problem is people just don't want to use them. Mm-hmm. So yes, it may sound a great idea, but then if you have a city like Amsterdam and you put in 200 hubs, that sounds like a lot, but it really raises such a burden for the use of a free-floating moped in our case. We see a drop of more than 45% after a city implements hubs. And those people are going back to their car, or at least part of them.
Yeah.
So I would like to sort of make the municipality a bit aware of the fact that hubs on paper look good, and it's sort of a hype train people can get onto, as many other hype trains. But if you look at the usage, it almost halves. So all the effort, all the investment you put in shared economy or shared mobility in this case, you just basically go back 5 years in time with the implementation of these hubs. What you can do is take up many more or cancel many more parking spots and put dedicated signage there. You see in cities where they do and they don't, because we have run that A/B test between Groningen, which doesn't, I think Rotterdam does. Then people start to use hubs. But just, okay, sounds very harsh, but from a desk, think let's put in 200 hubs, and then we solve a traffic or a parking problem. That's not how it
Like in
works.
theory, it should. but
It's,
it-
so that's a word of caution in general about, you want to really stimulate the usage, and then in a couple of years from now, you can benefit as a society from people owning less cars. But basically, already terminating the growth of something beforehand.
It stifles it. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the right word. So yeah.
So participation in there is very important, right? So not as a municipality coming up with the policy by ourselves in the ivory tower, but
I didn't use the word.
indeed talking to each other
Yeah.
and talking to the industry. That's really important. And I think what we did with the charging infrastructure, we basically put out a whole map with ideal locations and had a huge participation trajectory for people to comment on that. And we had thousands and thousands of reactions to basically move the spot specifically one place to the other. And I think together with the industry, together with the inhabitants of Amsterdam, together we need to make this work, because it's an innovative market. Things are changing all the time. There's companies out there that prefer free floating. There's users out there that prefer that they know exactly where they can find their shared car or their shared bike. There's different users and different preferences, and we need to see where the market is going. And we're also in the early stage of the acceptance. So all the early adopters, they are okay with maybe finding out via an app where the car is located. There's also a huge early majority and a late majority that we need to basically indeed get out of the car, and they have different preferences.
That will make impact, because that's where the end values are, the big numbers are. And just to comment on that, I mean that we see that, for example, the city of Amsterdam, the tender process, etc., is much more professional than, let's say, the smaller municipalities. So I think in general,
Because they know somebody and they just get the...
Exactly. I mean, we haven't met before, but we know who to contact within the municipality and vice versa.
Yeah.
While I think, and that will be a sort of a theme, because you said like reshaping the Netherlands, which is Amsterdam.
Yeah.
It would benefit the user, but also the non-user a lot if smaller or mid-sized cities in the Netherlands would follow the process that Amsterdam is following, or Rotterdam.
They love
But
to be told to be like Amsterdam, I think.
I try to.
You know what you should do?
Yeah, be like Amsterdam. No, but it really works. There's a level of proficiency and professionalism there, and knowledge, which is sometimes not the case in the smaller ones.
That's true. So in the Netherlands we have this meetings where we meet up with other municipalities, we exchange experience, and I have to say that also some very nice pilots are run in the smaller cities, because Amsterdam is busy, it's crowded, sometimes a pilot doesn't really work out there here in Amsterdam, so we exchange learnings with all the cities basically that are in this field, operating in this field.
I think that's a great point to end on. I'm going to check with the timing. Exactly. I knew we were kind of going over by a few minutes, which means we don't necessarily have a chance for questions right now, but we will all stick around here if anybody in the audience has a question for anyone on the stage here. Thank you guys for joining. This is really cool.
Very much.
And
Welcome.